Welcome back to the Engler Journey Podcast for another episode of celebrating success, embracing failure, and inspiring the entrepreneur inside of you. I'm Emily Frinson, and for the last 2 years, I have been your host of the Engler Journey Podcast. It is a bittersweet day to say goodbye to this community that encourages and inspires more than I ever could have or would have on my own, but it is a true pleasure to pass the reins to someone who is full of grit and grace. Rebel Grace Sjeklocha is the 2023 Miss Rodeo Nebraska, host of the Breaking the Barrier podcast, and you guessed it, the latest host of the Engler Journey Podcast. Before she takes over as host, this phenomenal Engler alumna will be in the guest seat to share her story. Rebel, welcome to the studio.
Thanks, Emily. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. So let's dive in and get to know you a little bit more. I would love to hear what young Rebel was like. So what did you want to be as a kid?
That's a really interesting question because I was having a conversation with someone the other day about this, and I was rummaging around through my things at home, and I found a notebook that had Rebel's songs scrawled over the cover. And so I dug into it, and, we kind of chatted about a few things that I did when I was younger. And I always had my nose in a book, always super musical, very nerdy, super tall, and had not an ounce of coordination. So if you can imagine this really tall, uncoordinated nerd who would take her little book of songs to recess every day, that's kind of who young Rebel was. But in terms of what I wanted to be, it changed often, but every time it changed, I was always so certain that that is what I was going to do. So at one point in time, I wanted to be a teacher, and I would force my brother to do all these worksheets that I made for him. I got into an HGTV kick, so I wanted to be a real estate agent. And then I wanted to be an attorney. And so I never really landed on one thing, but when I did land on something, I was so sure. And now here I am, 22 years old, and have absolutely no idea what that will look like for me. But I don't know. I hope that answers your question or gives you kind of a glimpse into who I was as a young child.
Yeah, that's incredible. So good. Did you ever dream of being Miss Rodeo Nebraska?
Oh, certainly. I met my first Miss Rodeo Nebraska when I was 8, and I was absolutely enthralled with her. Obviously, she was, just dressed immaculately from head to toe. I do vividly remember I was wearing a pair of lime green Fat Baby Cowgirl boots. If you remember what those look like, they're atrocious. But I was wearing my lime green boots, and Miss Rodeo Nebraska 2009, Amy Amack, was wearing a pair of lime green Wranglers. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this is fate. She is so cool. I want to be like her. But I never really thought that, being a rodeo queen is something that I could do. I just really liked going and watching them, and they actually had a program called the Little Cowgirls where you could go spend a day with Miss Rodeo Nebraska, and so I guess from that point on, I just was really hooked, and I didn't miss a pageant from then on, and so many of the women I admire have held the title of Miss Rodeo Nebraska, and I just feel so humbled that I get to add my name to that list too.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is so sweet. I'm picturing young Rebel looking at a future version of herself when you talk about that story, which is really cool to see. And knowing you, since I've had the pleasure of knowing you throughout the Engler program and even before that when you were in high school, it's really cool to see what you said about all the things you wanted to be and see you have such passion for whatever you're focused on, because you tell that in that story, and that's what I know you as now. But it's amazing to think of you being like that as a child too, yeah. Which is so cool.
Well, it's kind of been a domino effect, honestly. I mean, after I met Miss Rodeo Nebraska, I had horses at home, and I was really excited about them and interested in them. But from there, it gave me some things to work toward. So I started getting more competitive, and, then into college, I was a member of the Husker Equestrian team and the UNL Rodeo Club and things like that. And I don't necessarily think that I would have sunk my teeth into those activities, or the industry for that matter, as much if I hadn't have had that interaction, which is super exciting because now I get an entire year to hopefully, fingers crossed, to have that impact on other young people too.
Yeah. Would you give us a glimpse of what this year will be like as Miss Rodeo Nebraska, as if we had no idea what it was? Yeah.
Yes. So I'll hit the ground running in January. I'll travel across the state of Nebraska and also across the country, serving as Nebraska's official representative for professional rodeo. So primarily I'll go to rodeos sanctioned by the PRCA or the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association. But beyond that, I'll also attend community events, visit schools, you name it, judge pie contests, things like that. So I'll definitely be busy. But like I said, it's been a lifelong dream, and it's going to be a very jam-packed year. Some highlights: I'll kick off my year at the Denver Stock Show. I'll go to Rodeo Houston, Cheyenne Frontier Days, Pendleton, Oregon. And then I'll finish my year next December in Las Vegas at the Miss Rodeo America pageant, which sounds crazy to say out loud.
That is so fun. We're so excited to see what is to come for you in this year. And it's amazing because we'll get to get a glimpse of that, I'm sure, throughout your time hosting the podcast. And with that, I would ask you how you see the intersection of rodeo and entrepreneurship, because those are two things that I'm sure are close to heart for you. So as you think about this next year, hosting your podcast, Breaking the Barrier, and serving as Miss Rodeo Nebraska, what does that look like to kind of weave all of these together?
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, rodeo is a very entrepreneurial sport in the sense that you're really competing for yourself, and it's not really a team sport for that matter. And not only that, but rodeo is a pay-to-play sport. So cowboys and cowgirls have to pay entry fees in order to compete. And so there's an element of risk associated with every rodeo that they enter or every place that they go. Not only that, but they have horses to take care of and a bunch of logistics to keep in mind. And so some people might not think of rodeo as a sport in a traditional sense, but it really is a sport, but it's also, there also is a very large and prominent business side. And in terms of Miss Rodeo Nebraska, though I'm not starting a business through Miss Rodeo Nebraska, I really get to be entrepreneurial in the way that I craft my year. Every Miss Rodeo Nebraska approaches the title and the role so differently, depending on what they value and some of the things they've been involved in before. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to shape the year in terms of my priorities and hopefully leave the organization better than I found it.
Yeah. Wow. Inspired. Truly. How do you define entrepreneurship?
That's a tough question because there are so many different lenses you can look at entrepreneurship through. But for me, entrepreneurship has always just been the constant pursuit of aspiring to make something better, whether that, be in a business setting or not. All the entrepreneurs that I have met and admire are just constantly looking towards the next thing, not in a way that skips over experiencing what's in front of them, but in a way that acknowledges that there's more to be done and more barriers to break. I hate to say my play on words there. But entrepreneurship is really just looking a challenge in the eye and embracing it for what it is. And so, yeah, I guess that's kind of how I would define entrepreneurship. Yeah.
When did you learn what entrepreneurship was?
Well, both of my parents growing up had their own enterprises, and so I didn't really label it entrepreneurship, but I witnessed it from a very young age. And I think that's a familiar experience for lots of people who grow up in agriculture. My mom was a veterinarian and my dad had a custom hay grinding business. So I knew from a young age that I wanted to be my own boss. I just didn't know that meant being an entrepreneur per se. And so, yeah, that was my first taste of it, being in the hayfield, and along with that, seeing the late nights and the long hours that both of my parents put in. Yes, they got to be their own boss, but that came at the cost of maybe sacrificing not coming to a basketball game or something like that. And so I think I got a very realistic glimpse into what the life of an entrepreneur looks like day to day.
Yeah. And then from that experience, how did you find Engler?
So I actually didn't know anything about Engler coming into college. My sophomore year, I guess it was the end of my freshman year, I kind of felt a little discontent with my experience. I enjoyed my classes. I had made a bunch of really great friends, but something was just missing, I guess. And so one evening in the dorms, there was all this ruckus from a group of girls about Engler. And so I got out the Google machine and asked them a few questions. I got on Calendly and made a blind appointment with Tom Field. And so I went to Miller Hall, and at that time, Engler and the Rural Futures Institute were in the same building. And so I walked in. I didn't know where I was going, so I just sat at the bench at the very front of the building where no one was. And I was just afraid that I was in the wrong spot and that some janitor was going to kick me out because it didn't look like a legitimate office of any sort. But I had a conversation with Tom. He gave me some more information and then just made me feel welcome off the bat, invited me to go on the Engler trek that summer, even though I didn't know anyone. I didn't end up going, but just the fact that he extended that invitation made me feel really welcome. So that's kind of how I stumbled into Engler. But I mean, you kind of walk in and you get the essence that it's not the conventional experience that you're going to get with any other degree program or in any other sort of class.
Yeah, and what was that unconventional experience like for you throughout college?
So I didn't actually start taking Engler classes until the fall of my sophomore year. So I took the 101 course, and you know, that's just like an inspirational pep talk every Tuesday and Thursday when you go to class. So you leave class all inspired, walking on air. And then in the spring semester, you really get to put that all to the test with the $50 business class. So it's really the only class that you'll ever get paid to take in college, which is kind of cool. So myself and my teammates, our business was making and selling wild rags, which I didn't intend for this, but I'm actually wearing one of them today. Not that you can see that on a podcast. Yeah. But that was a great experience. Though I had observed entrepreneurship my entire life, getting a small taste of it really just emboldened my desire to continue on this path. And, you know, though I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, I know I'm rowing in the right direction.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah. And then I guess after that, I got more involved in leadership and in different small groups in the program. And, you know, it really is, it sounds really cliche and corny when we say that we're a community that you don't graduate from, but I think it's pretty evident, especially from the alum that we've had on the podcast, how connected everyone remains even after they graduate. And I can't tell you the relief I felt when I walked up the stairs today and am back in the Engler space in the studio. So very exciting for sure.
That is so encouraging. That's amazing. I feel that too. I know the feeling. That's awesome. Yes. Yeah. So you are a Nebraska graduate of the Engler program. You are Nebraska born and raised, and you are Miss Rodeo Nebraska. So a common theme between these is Nebraska.
Go Big Red.
Go Big Red. So I would ask you, what makes you eager to represent and serve Nebraska in this next year?
I think when you take a look at the state of Nebraska and you compare that to, you know, the ideals of the American cowboy, when I think of Nebraska, I instantly think of the Sandhills. And so it's all intertwined, and especially, you know, our agricultural roots are really important to us. But the ideals that we hold dear are so marketable. Hard work, integrity, grit, all of those things are things that we can all strive for and that we all resonate with. And so whether I'm representing the state of Nebraska or I'm representing our agricultural community, or I'm, you know, serving as a spokesperson for rodeo and rodeo competitors, I feel like the values of Nebraska and the values of Nebraskans can resonate anywhere. And so that's what's really exciting as I get to obviously travel our state, but also speak with people across the country about all the awesome things that our state has to offer. Obviously, we're not a hub for tourism, but I think one conversation with a small town Nebraskan would convert anyone to want to spend time here.
Yeah. What are your favorite pastimes of Nebraska? If you have a night off, what would you do?
Well, if I'm not at a rodeo, I suppose I do enjoy tanking very much. Anything outdoors is something that I enjoy. I don't know if this is particularly Nebraska focused, but in the last year, I started playing the guitar. So my ideal evening is usually sitting on my front porch and trying to learn a new song. So I am certainly not a pro at this point, but it is something that I really enjoy.
Yeah, so good to hear. Wow, that's super fun. Another thing I would like to ask you, since this podcast has the mission of celebrating success, embracing failure, and inspiring entrepreneurs, what is a recent success you are celebrating and maybe a failure that you've embraced as you think about the last few years of all of the experiences you've had from college, transitioning out of that and into this new role? Two-part question: success and failure.
I think I'll start with the failure. I think that this is, I don't want to say a universal experience, but certainly not an uncommon experience. When you graduate, you leave the university system and you're kind of floating through space and time in this weird way that you haven't before. When in college you think you're an adult and you think you have your life together, and then you actually, take those first few shaky steps out, and you kind of realize that, if I want to do something or be anything, it's up to me. Mm-hmm. And so I'd say in terms of a failure, it has kind of taken me a few months to get my feet under me and figure out how to structure my time as an adult in the real world. So it's a general feeling out process, but I've learned a lot from it, and excited to refine that going forward. A success, I know we've talked a lot about Miss Rodeo Nebraska up to this point and in this episode, but to me, it doesn't really feel real, or that I'm in these boots. That sounds really corny. But last week I picked up my official Miss Rodeo Nebraska buckle that has my name on it, which I'm not an overly emotional person, but it brought tears to my eyes just to see it come full circle. Like my name etched in the buckle is a very real and tangible thing. And so, yeah, that was a success that really touched me.
Yeah, so good. So good. In light of both of those stories, what do you believe to be true of failure?
I think failure is very necessary. I fail every day at something. Everyone does. And whether that's, in relationships and trying to strengthen those or make them healthier or do whatever, I think failure is a very overlooked thing. And I love how much Engler places emphasis on bringing failures to light, especially in this fast-paced, social media-driven world that we live in, because, we miss so much context. We see everyone's highlight reel, and I know that that's like beating a dead horse. Everyone knows that. But do we really? Sometimes we don't often, take the time to sit back and recognize that we don't always see the full story. And so I really appreciate just how transparent the Engler community is in general with sharing, the high points, but also the moments that aren't as glamorous too. Yeah,
that's so good. So with that, my next question is, what is your why in this phase of life? Because when we fail, which we know we do, the why or the purpose that we can come back to is often what keeps us going. So what is your why in this phase of life that's kind of propelling you in all of the things that you're doing?
I think there are two parts to this. I think there's an inward-facing why and then an outward-facing why. Mm-hmm. So inwardly, I have this incredible opportunity through hosting the podcast, through traveling for the next year, to really develop and lean into my strengths, and also I'm opening myself up to learning so many new things. And so my why inwardly is to just develop myself and develop skills that I'm going to be able to use for the rest of my life in meaningful ways. And so just adding to that tool belt is what I'm focused on there. And then my outward why is I have not gotten to this point without the help of so many people who have encouraged me and believed in me and spoken life to me when I didn't feel like I was up to snuff. I mean, for Pete's sakes, I ran for the Miss Teen Rodeo, Nebraska as a little teeny bopper, and I was runner-up twice and won on my third try. And so, though that experience may sound silly, as a teenage girl, that's absolutely devastating, you know? And the people that picked me up by my bootstraps and helped me believe that I could accomplish things, whether that's graduating from college or starting a podcast, agreeing to host another one, I think my why in this phase is to breathe life into people and help them realize the potential that is in them. And as corny as it sounds, when you're dressed in full queen attire, people listen to what you have to say, especially the younger generation. And so if I can plant a seed of optimism and self-confidence, that's what I want to do.
Incredible. I'm so encouraged by your story and so excited to see what is to come for you, Rebel, really. Yeah. So the way that we're going to end this podcast is a rapid fire Q&A. So I'm just going to rapid fire give you some fun questions so we can get to know Rebel outside of all of the things. So yeah, are you ready?
I suppose so.
Okay, I'm going to go for it. Favorite home cooked meal?
Steak and potatoes.
Go-to coffee shop order?
Black coffee.
Flying or driving?
Driving.
Something you always need?
Diet Coke.
Best advice you've ever been given?
If you have to question whether something is right or wrong, you probably already know the answer.
Oh, man. I like that one. Favorite clothing brand?
Wrangler.
Beach or mountains?
Mountains.
Someone you want to see in concert?
I would like to see Shane Smith and the Saints again.
So good. Dream vacation spot?
Iceland.
Favorite holiday?
Thanksgiving.
Awesome.
Oh no, I take that back. It's definitely Halloween. I decorate way more for Halloween than any other holiday.
That's amazing. Where does that come from? Did you always do that?
I don't know. No, it's been since college started thing.
That is fun. Yeah. That is so fun. So last question, a hill that you are willing to die on. Or we can exit it.
That the 308 is superior to the 402. I'm kidding. We should probably cut that out too. That'll make people angry. I'm totally kidding. Yay, Nebraska.
That is so funny. Can I leave that? I think it's funny. Okay, cool. That's awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you today, and I've loved getting to know you more through this, and I am just so inspired by your story through all of it. I do see themes of grit and grace, which is significant because your name is Rebel Grace.
Oh, goodness.
The ultimate oxymoron.
Yeah, you're one of the ultimate oxymoron. I was going to say, you're one of the only people that calls me Rebel Grace, and I enjoy it.
Okay, good, because I do too. It's really fun. That's incredible. Well, thank you for your time with us today. And lastly, I would ask you if there's anything else you would like to share that we didn't get to today.
And nothing in particular. I'm just really excited and grateful for the opportunity to be face to face with so many wonderful people and inspiring stories. And I'm excited to play a small role in telling those.
Yeah. Well, that's a wrap, folks. Thanks, Rebel.